Hi, my name's Irrelevant, and throughout my retro computing series, certain vintage hard drives have made cameo appearances. Today on the show, I'm going to benchmark those hard drives. I'm going to find out just how fast, or shall I say slow, they really are. Majority of the SATA hard drives are going to be tested on this AS Media 1061 PCI Express SATA controller. It supports SATA 3 or SATA 600, whatever your philosophy is. The SCSI interface is a good old Adaptec 2940. Now, according to the specifications in its internal settings menu, its maximum support speed is about 10 megabytes a second. So those SCSI hard drives are already limited by their interface speed to begin with. The test bench we're using is an AMD Phenom 2 X4 940. That's a 3 gigahertz quad core. It's got 2 gigabytes of Kingston HyperX DDR2 RAM in 1066 speed. An ATI Radeon X1900 XT, not that that matters for the purpose of this experiment, and it's booting Windows XP. This is the most modern system I have that will properly support Windows XP, and Windows XP is the most modern operating system I have that will both run the software we need to use and also support that old Adaptec SCSI controller. So it's a good middle ground. We're going to be using Crystal Discmark Best Girl Waifu Edition apparently, and I'm just going to be doing one pass because I don't want to be here all night long, and I'm going to be doing 64 megabyte files. That's the largest file that all the drives I'm going to be doing today will mutually support. I'm also running it in real world performance mode because that gives me the readout that I prefer. And seeing here, I have a nice spreadsheet drawn up to log my results. Let's get started. First up, we got the SanDisk X600, which should hot plug, and I'm not going to have to restart. Here we go. Starting off strong. 372 read, 338 write. That's an SSD for you, a good SSD. 3282 random read, 6441 random write, 8,000 read IOPS, a 50,725 write IOPS. Now these last two, I'm not exactly sure what they mean. They're rating reads and writes in microseconds. I'm guessing that's something to do with response time. Moving forward, let's try the C drive, the Intel 40. Consistent with an older SSD, we've got, half the read speeds, but still good read speeds for SATA performance. But we take a huge hit on the write speeds. It was harder to write flash back then, I think. But then you do see the random reads and write, the performance stays consistent. The read speeds, okay. Write, again, roughly half the speed, but the IOPS, they're still there. We do see a perspective difference in the loss of write speeds, but nevertheless, this still translates to some pretty good real-world performance. Next up, the Western Digital Red. It's pretty quiet for a spin drive. Oh, well, this is no good. Whatever this Windows 10 Special is formatted to, Windows NT doesn't like it. So much for being able to support everything. I've gone ahead and booted it up into Windows 10. This system will work with Windows 10. Those are some high numbers for a spin drive, and you'd be right. You see, this drive has 64 megs of cache, so if we only do a 64 meg file, it's going to function kind of like an SSD. We need to really pump those numbers up to find out what it really is going to do. Let's go 4 times that and see what happens. Still with the high numbers. Oh, that's interesting. I guess that just goes to show what a good modern spin drive is still capable of doing. You're not going to want to boot off of it, but it's no slouch. The Windows 10 struggle is real. Actually, these results are really interesting. If you look at this, the results are consistent across the board regardless of this size. I wonder how big of a size we have to actually scan before we see a difference. These numbers suggest that it outperforms that 40 gig Intel, but that just doesn't make any sense. We're going to move on to a 74 gig Western Digital. This will give us a good representation of what was considered fast SATA hard drive did back in the day. 74 gigabytes, 16 megs of cache. They originally released with 8. This was the slightly upgraded version. 69. Nice. And of course it has a nice distinctive click. 71 megabytes a second read. Even though this drive was considered a ripper for the time, it fails compared to modern drives. Its write speeds are actually faster. Random read, 0.86 megabytes a second? Is that right? And then 1.64 in the random write. Wow. IOPS, 210. We're used to seeing those numbers in the tens to hundreds of thousands now with SSDs, but back in those days, not so much. And in the microseconds response times, I'm assuming lower is better. And indeed, we are not doing better here. Which just goes to prove something that we kind of know already. Even an old fast drive is going to be slower than a newer slow drive. That's just the order of nature. Next up on the chopping block, a 40 gigabyte Maxtor IDE drive. It's probably ATA 66, I would imagine. It could be ATA 100. This is the drive featured in my dual Pentium Pro build that had Windows 2000 installed on it. Let's see what it's gonna do. Oh boy, this is when we're gonna see those numbers really start to drop. Look at this. 22.23 megabytes a second read and 22.02 write. Now that's cool. It's a pretty consistent read and write. But what about these random read and write numbers? Seriously? Less than a megabyte a second? And those IOPS, they go from the thousands to the hundreds. And these bottom numbers, they really look exciting and huge, but you gotta remember, this is representative of drive latency. So, this thing's taken quite a while to get those reads and writes through, bud. Next up, the 10 gigabyte Quantum Fireball that did the Windows 98 install in the dual Pentium Pro build. With a name like Fireball, you'd think it would sound fast too. All right, what does waifu best girl have to say about this Quantum Fireball? Well, would you get a load of those numbers? 36.28 across the board in read and write. Still, less than a megabyte a second in random read and write. Now, one of the first things we're seeing is virtually better performance than the Maxtor drive, even though the Maxtor drive should be newer and better. The response time for read is much faster. In fact, its read times are quite a bit faster than the Maxtor, yet the Maxtor seems to have faster write times and write response. Moving down the line, a 3.2 gigabyte Seagate Medalist I found in the Compact Desk Pro 2000. All right, my best girl, how do you like the Seagate? Oh, wow. Oh boy, this guy's a ripper. Check this out. Just under 5 megabytes sustained, and we're into the quarter megabytes random. Our IOPS are now in the mid double digits, and our response times, they're in the tens of thousands. Oh boy. We've seen a significant drop in performance here, but I guess that's consistent with drives of that era. Well, if we're getting that out of that 3 gig Seagate, what shall we expect out of this 850 megabyte Connor? Dated 1995, we are finally sub 1 gigabyte here. Alrighty, here goes nothing. Oh boy, these are some more dismal numbers. We've dropped to about half of both the sustained and random megabytes a second. Same with the IOPS. And also our response time has doubled. Well then, this thing is literally half the performance of the Seagate, or I'll say roughly half the performance of the Seagate. Just under 3 megabytes a second. Is that the performance that we expected to have back in those days, or is this drive just worn out? I don't know. We'd need a time machine to find out. Well, if that's the performance we get out of an 850 megabyte Connor, then what would we expect out of this 365 megabyte IBM? This one's 2 years the Connor's senior. It clocks in at about 1993, whereas the Connor, it said 1995. My first impressions is that this one has one of the more hard drive sounds. That very cliche and somewhat, I would almost want to say, iconic motor noise. All right, best girl, what do you say about this IBM? Oh, these are surprising numbers. The sequential read and write are on par with the Connor, maybe a little bit less, but our random read and write are significantly better, almost double. Same with our IOPS, and the same thing with our response times. For all intents and purposes, this thing theoretically outperforms the Connor in real-world performance, even though it's 2 years older and smaller. It could be the difference between the Connor being a more consumer-grade drive and the IBM being more of a commercial or professional-grade drive. As an extra value-added bonus, I have this 6GB IBM Travel Star that came out of an old IBM ThinkPad. 4200 RPM, April 2000. I have a full-size IDE adapter for these kinds of drives, so let's see what this thing's like. It makes a bit of a funny noise. It's probably not good to do that. Alright, now that we have this little drive spinning, best girl, what say you? Oh, what do you know? We got like 11 to 12 megabytes a second sustained. We got the third of a megabyte in random, and our IOPS, well, they're in the decent double digits. Response times in the tens of thousands, as expected. Well, that's interesting. It's not that old of a drive. It greatly outperforms the old IDE drives, but at the same time, it puts itself, half of what the bigger IDE drives do. It's probably the similar error as these ones. And now, it's time for our feature presentation. We now enter the realm of the SCSI. This is what this video's really about. The rest of this, it was just to add interest to it. But we're starting off with my 1GB Hewlett-Packard server drive that I had as my C drive back in my Pentium Pro days. Ah yes, the drive that hurts our ears. Literally, there's something about the high pitch that comes off that drive that once you've been listening to it for a while and you turn it off, it just feels like pressure gets taken off your head. It's time for our best girl to go antiquing. Oh, that was a nice healthy click. Well, these are some interesting numbers, right in line of what I was kind of expecting now after having seen those IDE drives perform. If this had been the first drive that I booted up, I would have found these drives more amusing, but now I kind of know what to expect. We're seeing performance equivalent to that of the IBM, literally all across the board, almost to the point where you almost question if they're similar drives, or if it's some sort of glitch. I do have the right drive in there, right? Yeah, looks like it. Once again, it outperforms the Connor, but when we compare it to any of the IDE drives north of 3GB, they put it to the dust. And to think, this was my C drive back in an era when I had a 5GB Western Digital at my disposal. Here I was thinking that, hey, by adding a SCSI drive, I can make my system faster, because it's fancy SCSI, right? It's high-end stuff, it's gotta be better. Well, no, it's old SCSI. Best I could tell, that drive's from 1993. Next up, the 340 megabyte Maxter. This was my swap file drive, my virtual memory drive, and it's from 1989. It's the oldest drive we're testing so far, and actually I think it might be the oldest drive I have on the table at all. Now, funny story with this drive, I dropped it. I think I'm gonna name it Linus. I ran diagnostics on it and it was all bad sectors, but I could tell it was some sort of glitch. After low-level formatting it and then doing a reformat, it seems to be working fine now. Just needed a little bit of freshening up. 1989. That drive's 31 years old now. Damn, that's older than my last few girlfriends. What's that? Oh yeah, clicky clicky? All right. Best girl, tell us, once and for all, what kind of memory, virtual memory performance was I getting back in the 90s? That does not sound promising. Ooh. Oh, wow. Look at these numbers. 1 megabyte a second. Oh, 0.15 random. Our IOPS jumped down into the high 30s, and our response time is just off the charts. We would have been better off with that Connor drive as our virtual memory. Like literally. The Connor drive has slower response times in the random write and the random write IOPS, but well, you know what? All the random specs are just a little bit better than the Connor, but the sustained, wow. That was my virtual memory. Oh, no wonder that photo took 5 minutes to load in that other video. But then, remember when we went to Windows 98 with the 10 gigabyte Quantum? The Quantum is 40 times faster than this drive, at least in the sustained. Wow. Wow. Imagine these numbers as your RAM performance. Oh boy, it just doesn't get any better than that, right? Right. Of the big three, I have saved the best for last. 5 1/4, full height, from 1994. A sequel incorporated labeled DEC5400S. 4 gigabyte audio visually SCSI hard drive. She is a beast, and also one of the healthiest and strongest of the big three. This one had no bad sectors and didn't need any tweaking to get it ready for this test. It just worked. Let's just park her right there. Filling up that frame, bud. Oh yeah. Let's give her a start up. I wish that video card wasn't so loud so you could hear this thing. The sound of this thing, I enjoy it. It's not as obnoxious as the 1 gig HP. It's also got a nice healthy click. Listen to that. And if it wasn't on this foam, it would be shaking the table. A nice powerful reed heads. Oddly enough, made in 1994, it's also the newer of the three. All right, best girl, can you take a drive this big? Let's find out. Now, on top of being a large drive, it was supposed to be higher end. They didn't make drives that big for nothing, especially it's newer than those other two smaller drives. The size, I guess, is reflective of its capacity and how physically big it had to be, but will it also be reflective of its speed? Oh. Indeed, indeed. Look at that. It is the fastest of the three. We are back into the quarter randoms. Sustained is almost 4 megabytes a second. Our IAPs are back into the highs. Well, actually, no, it's similar with the HP. So what are we getting from this? The random performance is slower than the HP, but the sustained performance is much better. Maybe that's what was significant. It was considered an audio-visual SCSI. It was used for, I guess, video media at some point. Maybe it was used in an early surveillance system or video capture. Who knows? But I guess under those circumstances, a sustained read and write would have been more important. Either way, for all intents and purposes, we're not really losing much performance compared to the HP, but the sustained, I would say it a win. I would consider this, based on how this would average out, I would say that this thing is indeed faster than the other two. I am impressed. This is excellent drive for its time. Oh, listen for it to turn off. This is great. Oh yeah. This one woman I was dating, she'd swear she was hearing a cat across the other end of the house. So at this point, I've gone through all the old drives that so far have cameoed in my videos, but we're not done yet. I got a couple bonuses. Here, found in my archives, is an even older and smaller drive. It is a 160 megabyte IBM SCSI drive. Based on the dates that I'm seeing here, it's not even that old. It's from March 1992, which even though it's smaller, it's newer than the Maxter. It's going to be about the same age as the HP, but just a little bit older than that DEC. In the time that I've had this, I've never actually used it for anything. It's just kind of been in my collection. Pulled it out of an old system and bam. Let's see if I was missing anything. An IBM KZP, apparently. It's funny, it says WDS33160 on the label. It's got a distinct hard drivey tone to it. Let's see what it can do. The 64 megabyte file I'm printing on there's pretty much using up half the drive. It's taking a while for this test to get started. There it goes finally. Perhaps that's the shape of things to come. It's got a nice throaty click sound to it. Ooh. Wow. Folks, we have broken a record here today. For the first time of all of these drives, less than 1 megabyte a second across the board. The lowest IOPS, the lowest response time, the lowest everything. Look at that. Wow. And I thought that Maxter was pathetic. It's newer than the Maxter and it performs less. Oh boy. I almost feel like a floppy drive would outperform this thing. Wow. I'm not even mad. That's impressive. It might make a great little DOS drive, and that's probably about all it was good for. Well, that, my friends, is the last hard drive, the very last one. No more to test, but we are going to close out this video on a curiosity. The SciQuest Easy Drive. It is effectively a hard drive with a removable platter. And best I can tell from playing with it, its response times or its speed feels somewhat equivalent to a hard drive of the era. Well, we're gonna find out. Got the big beefy cable, but I guess that's what it takes to fit 50 wires in one cable. It is a hard drive platter inside a cartridge. Now, while this drive is operational, do not touch it. Do not move it. Do not bump it. Maybe even don't even look at it. I believe it to be very susceptible to head crash. It's registering as a removable drive. Oh, I've got a bunch of doom on here. All right, best girl, tell us, are you easy? So far, it seems to be responding faster than the IBM drive. Oh. We got some nice random click action there. Interesting. Look at these numbers. We've got 1.5 to 2 megabytes a second of sustained into the 0.15 random IOPS in the high 30s again, and the response time also in the 20,000s. Let us compare. Of all the SCSIs, it is virtually on par in the random with the Maxter. And sustained, it's comparable to the HP. HP's got much faster random, which means, realistically, you know, I could have used this as the boot drive or the virtual memory and been no worse for wear, really, compared to these other things. It outperforms the IBM, hands down, but, you know, just scraping by. Yes, it realistically outperforms the Maxter too, by a narrow margin. But that's pretty good. For a removable drive at the time to be able to keep up with a hard drive, it's the best of these three anyway. It's earned a bit of respect. But that's it. That's all I got for you. I'm sure I could plug away for another hour testing out random crap that I have around here, but this is pretty much part and parcel of what I had planned for this video. And I hope you find it as entertaining as I would if I was watching it and wasn't the one making it. Oh boy, admittedly, you have no idea how many times I made mistakes and had to refilm certain drives. Oh well, 'twas a good day.